There is a moment most of us know well. You are going about your day. Nothing is wrong. You feel, if not perfectly content, at least okay. Life is moving. You are moving with it. And then you open your phone. Maybe you see a notification. Maybe you just scroll out of habit, that automatic thumb movement that happens before the conscious mind even decides anything. And within seconds, sometimes within a single swipe, everything shifts. A friend from university just got promoted. Again. Someone you follow posted photos from a vacation that looks like it was designed by someone who has never experienced a bad angle or an overcast sky. An old classmate who you barely remember is apparently running a company now, accepting congratulations from hundreds of people, living what looks like a life of complete and effortless assembly. And just like that, the okay day is gone. Not because anything happened to you, because you compared. Comparison is not just the thief of joy, it is the thief of the present moment, and of the life you are already living. What you are about to listen to is a complete audiobook, 30 minutes, 7 chapters, the full science, psychology and neuroscience of social comparison, where it comes from, what it is doing to your mind and your daily life, and exactly what you can do to take back control of how it affects you. This is not a collection of motivational quotes. This is the research, the real mechanism, the truth about why your brain does this, and the evidence-backed practices that actually change it. Stay with it from the beginning. The chapters build on each other. By the end, you will understand something that most people carry their entire lives as an unexplained ache, without ever knowing what causes it, or that it can be changed. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Brain That Was Built to Compare. In 1954, an American social psychologist named Leon Festinger published what would become one of the most cited papers in the entire history of psychology. The paper was called A Theory of Social Comparison Processes, and it appeared in the journal Human Relations. At its core, Festinger was trying to answer a deceptively simple question: how do human beings form an understanding of their own abilities and worth? His answer changed how we understand human behavior entirely. Festinger proposed that human beings have a fundamental, innate, biological drive to evaluate themselves, not occasionally, not when they feel insecure or threatened, constantly, automatically, without asking permission from the conscious mind. And because we almost never have a purely objective external measure of our own abilities or value, because there is no meter on the wall that tells you how successful you are, no scale that reads out your social worth, we do the only thing that feels natural. We look at the people around us. We compare. Comparison is not a character flaw. It is biology, ancient, involuntary, and written into the operating system long before social media existed. Here is what makes this discovery so important, and so unsettling in equal measure. This drive is not modern. It is not caused by Instagram or TikTok or the relentless highlight reels of digital life. It predates all of that by hundreds of thousands of years. For most of human history, knowing exactly where you stood within your social group was a survival matter. Were you keeping up with others in terms of skills, contribution, social standing? Were you falling behind in ways that might get you excluded from the tribe? Were you doing enough to remain valuable, to remain safe? The brain that could accurately track those questions, that could quickly read social signals and evaluate position, kept people alive. That exact brain, with every one of its ancient evaluation circuits intact, is the one you are living inside right now. Except now, instead of a tribe of 20 people whose actual lives you could observe in full and in context, it is being asked to process the edited, filtered, algorithmically curated social signals of thousands of strangers. The hardware has not changed. The world it is running in has changed completely. Festinger identified two directions that comparison can move. The first is upward comparison, where you measure yourself against someone who appears to have more success, more achievement, more status, a more assembled life. Upward comparison is the one that stings, the one that follows you home from the phone and into the quiet of the night. The second is downward comparison, where you measure yourself against someone who appears to be doing worse. Psychologists have found that downward comparison temporarily boosts mood. It is not a generous impulse, but it is a deeply human one, and the fact that it exists at all tells us something important. Comparison is not just about pain. It is a navigation tool the brain uses to understand its position in the world. The problem is not the tool itself. The problem is the environment we are now using it in. Chapter 2. What social media did to an ancient instinct. If Festinger's 1954 research established that the comparison drive is biological, the research of the past decade has established something equally important, that digital social environments have turned that ancient mechanism into something genuinely harmful for millions of people. In 2014, researchers Vogel, Rose, Roberts, and Eccles set out to study exactly what happened to people's self-evaluation after they engaged in social comparison on Facebook. Their study was published in the journal Psychology of Popular Media Culture. What they found was not subtle. People who engaged in upward social comparison on social media experienced significantly lower self-evaluations. Not marginally lower, measurably, consistently, significantly lower, and the effect was strongest for individuals who were already more oriented towards social comparison, meaning the people most vulnerable were also the most affected. Then in 2022, researchers McComb and Mills at York University in Canada went deeper. Their study, published in the open-access journal Plios 1, found that upward social comparisons on social media partially mediated, meaning acted as a mechanism in the relationship between social media use and clinical depression. In plain language, the more a person engaged in upward comparison online, the worse their mental health outcomes became. This was not a coincidence. It was a causal chain. Social media exposure led to upward comparison. Upward comparison led to worsening depression. You are comparing the full, unedited, behind-the-scenes reality of your own life against the curated, filtered, best moments only highlight reel of everyone else. And here is the detail that makes this so difficult to escape on your own. Social media platforms are not neutral spaces. They are engineered, deliberately, algorithmically, at enormous cost, to surface content that generates the strongest emotional response. Content that makes you feel something tends to keep you on the platform, and nothing generates a consistent emotional response quite like watching other people's success. People do not post their worst days. They do not post their doubts, their 2 a.m. anxieties, their professional failures, their relationship difficulties. They post their promotions, their weddings, their holidays, their transformations. They post the finished product, the outcome of months or years of invisible work, conflict, doubt, and struggle that never made it into the caption. Your brain receives this stream of curated peak moments and processes it with the same ancient circuitry that evolved to evaluate real people in real time in small groups. It cannot tell the difference between a real social signal and a staged photograph. It just registers they are ahead, you are behind, and it hurts accordingly. Chapter 3. 4 ways comparison quietly dismantles your life. Understanding where comparison comes from is the first step. The second step, the one that changes how you feel about what has been happening to you, is understanding specifically what it does, not in vague terms, not as a general feeling of being left behind, in 4 distinct, concrete, documented ways. The first is this: comparison steals the present moment. When you are comparing yourself to someone else, you are not living your own life. You are auditing it. You are standing outside your own experience, holding it up against someone else's timeline and running the numbers. But the audit is rigged from the beginning. You have access to every chapter of your own story, every failure, every setback, every ordinary Tuesday, every private fear. You have access to almost none of someone else's. You see their chapter 15. They see your full manuscript. And when the brain compares those two things, the result is always the same. The present moment, the only moment you actually have, the only place where your life is actually occurring, disappears into the calculation. The second is this. Comparison rewrites your wins as losses. You work for months towards something. You reach it. You feel briefly and genuinely proud. And then you encounter someone who reached the same point in half the time, or who has reached something larger, or who appears to have done it all with an ease that makes your effort look inadequate by comparison. And in that moment, not because anything about your achievement changed, but because your frame of reference did, what was a real win becomes evidence of how far you still have to go. Comparison does not just make you feel behind, it goes backwards, it dismantles what you already built. It takes things that were real and earned and converts them, retroactively, into reminders of inadequacy. The third is this. Comparison creates a self-sustaining loop. The research of McComb and Mills documented what anyone caught in the comparison trap will immediately recognize. People with lower self-esteem are more likely to engage in upward comparison, and upward comparison lowers self-esteem further, which increases the urge to compare, which lowers self-esteem further still. This is not metaphor. It is a documented psychological feedback loop. You compare because you feel behind. You feel more behind because you compared. The loop generates its own fuel, and the longer it runs, the deeper the groove it cuts, the more automatic it becomes, the harder it is to interrupt from the inside. The fourth is this. Comparison gradually replaces your values with someone else's. This is the quietest damage of all. When you spend months or years measuring your life against other people's, you slowly absorb their metrics, their definition of what success looks like at 30, at 40, their timeline, their version of what a good life should contain. And somewhere in that process, without a single dramatic moment of decision, you stop asking what you actually want from your life. You start asking what they have that you do not. The result is not just a feeling of unhappiness. It is a life built on borrowed goals, measured by standards that were never yours, running toward a finish line that someone else drew. You cannot build a life that feels like yours by measuring it against a life that was never yours to live. Chapter 4. What is actually happening in your brain? To begin changing your relationship with comparison, you need to understand what is actually happening at the neurological level when it fires. Because this is not, at its root, a motivational problem. It is not a discipline problem. It is not a character flaw that could be fixed with enough willpower. It is a neuroscience problem. And neuroscience problems respond to neuroscience solutions. When you encounter someone who appears to be superior to you on a dimension you care about, a better career, a more impressive body, a life that looks more fully assembled, your brain registers it as a social threat. The amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection and emotional processing center, activates. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, begins to rise. Your nervous system enters a mode of evaluative scanning. Where do I stand? Am I safe? Am I enough? Am I losing ground? This process happens in milliseconds. It happens before you consciously register what you saw. It is involuntary by design. You cannot decide not to feel it. You cannot control the first 3 seconds of the comparison response. You can absolutely control what happens in the 3 seconds after. This is where the prefrontal cortex, the executive, rational, decision-making region of the brain, enters the picture. The prefrontal cortex has the capacity to evaluate the comparison, to place it in context, to ask whether it is accurate and relevant, and to redirect the brain's response towards something useful. But it can only do this if it is given the right signal, and it can only do it reliably if the redirecting pathway has been practiced enough to be accessible under emotional stress, because stress narrows the brain's processing and makes the older, more automatic circuits dominant. This is why habits matter so much in this context. You are not simply choosing to think differently, you are literally constructing new neural pathways through repetition, pathways that, over time, become faster and more automatic than the threat response itself. Neuroscience also reveals something important about what happens when you shift from comparing outward to other people, to comparing inward to your own past self. When you focus on your own progress over time, this activates the brain's reward circuitry in a measurably different way. Psychologists call this temporal self-appraisal, comparing who you are today to who you were some time ago. Instead of triggering the threat detection system, temporal self-appraisal activates the circuits associated with growth, mastery, and genuine motivation. You are not just telling yourself a more comforting story. You are activating a different neural architecture entirely. There is also the specific role of dopamine in the social media comparison cycle, and understanding this mechanism can change how you relate to your phone. When you see someone else's success in your feed, you receive a brief dopamine signal: curiosity, novelty, engagement. This is the same mechanism that makes any new and potentially relevant information feel compelling. But when the brain classifies that content as an upward comparison, as a threat to your social standing, the dopamine signal is immediately followed by a cortisol response. Brief reward, then the drop. Brief reward, then the drop. Your brain, in effect, punishes you for looking. And yet, because of how dopamine and variable reward schedules work, it keeps pulling you back. It is the same mechanism that makes slot machines so difficult to walk away from. After an extended scrolling session, your nervous system is genuinely exhausted, not from the activity itself, but from the repeated cycle of activation and crash. Chapter 5. 7 Habits that Actually Change the Loop. 7 habits. Each one targets a specific point in the comparison cycle: the trigger, the interpretation, the environment, the response. These are evidence-based practices, not abstract mindset advice. Each one has a mechanism, a reason why it works at the level of brain function. Begin with 1, the one that speaks most directly to where you are right now. Practice it for 2 weeks before adding another. This is not a program to complete. It is a set of tools to use. Habit 1. Compare yourself to your past self, not to other people. Every Monday, before you open any social media, take 2 minutes to answer one question: in what one specific area am I ahead of where I was 7 days ago? Not ahead of anyone else. Not ahead of an idealized version of yourself. Ahead of the actual, real person you were last Monday. This is temporal self-appraisal in practice, the same process that, as we discussed in the previous chapter, activates the reward circuits without triggering the threat response. You receive the motivational benefit of comparison without the psychological cost. 1 question, 2 minutes, every Monday. That is the complete habit. Habit 2. Name the comparison the moment it fires. The next time you catch yourself in the middle of a comparison, and you will, because the brain is wired for it, say it out loud or write it down in one sentence. I am comparing myself to this person about this specific thing. This process is called affect labeling, naming an emotional state in specific language, and research consistently shows that it activates the prefrontal cortex and measurably reduces the amygdala's threat response. You are not suppressing what you feel. You are shifting who is in control of what happens next. The comparison loses none of its content, but you are now observing it rather than being inside it. And observation is where choice becomes possible. Habit 3. Deliberately curate what enters your attention. You would not allow a person to walk into your home each morning and spend 20 minutes telling you that your life does not measure up. But that is precisely what you allow when you follow accounts that consistently trigger upward comparison without providing genuine inspiration, education, or meaningful value. This week, go through who you follow and ask one honest question about each account. Does this content reliably leave me feeling energized and genuinely inspired, or does it reliably leave me feeling inadequate? Keep what inspires you. Mute, restrict, or unfollow what consistently diminishes you. This is not avoidance. This is the application of intentionality to your mental environment, the same care you would bring to what you let into your physical space. Habit 4. Practice expansive gratitude, not suppressive gratitude. Gratitude is one of the most overused and misapplied concepts in self-help, but the research supporting it, when it is practiced correctly, is robust. The mistake most people make is using gratitude as a suppressor, telling themselves they should not feel bad because they have so much to be grateful for. This approach tends to add shame on top of the original comparison pain. The more effective practice is this. Each evening, write down one thing you have today that a past version of yourself, a year ago, 5 years ago, a decade ago, would have been genuinely relieved to have. Not compared to others, compared to where you started. Your brain does not distinguish between looking outward at someone else's life and looking backward at your own earlier life. Both are comparisons, but one reliably leaves you feeling behind. The other reliably leaves you feeling like you have already arrived somewhere that once felt impossibly far away. Habit 5. Define what enough looks like before the day begins. Each morning, before your first look at any external input, before the first signal from the outside world enters your attention, ask yourself one question. What would be genuinely enough today? Not perfect, not exceptional, not more than the person next to you. Enough. When you define enough in advance, specifically and concretely in your own language, according to your own values, your brain has a landing place. Without it, enough is always just out of reach. It is always whatever the person you last compared yourself to has. With it, you carry a standard that belongs to your life, a standard that cannot be moved by someone else's highlight reel. Habit 6. Use comparison as a direction finder, not a verdict. The goal, as we will discuss in the next chapter, is not to stop comparing entirely. That is neurologically impossible, and trying to force it is simply a new source of frustration. The goal is to change what you do with the comparison once it fires. When you notice yourself comparing upward, when you see someone doing something that you genuinely admire, practice a two-step redirect. First, name what specifically you admire. Not a vague sense of wanting what they have, but the precise quality or achievement that calls to something in you. Second, ask whether this is a direction you genuinely want to move in, or simply a dimension on which you have been conditioned to measure yourself. The first question turns comparison into information. The second question ensures that information serves your actual values, not borrowed ones. Habit 7. Interrupt the rumination loop early. In 2008, psychologist Susan Nolan Hoeksema and her colleagues published a landmark review in Perspectives on Psychological Science on the psychology of rumination, the repetitive, looping, self-focused negative thinking that comparison so reliably feeds. Their central finding was clear. Rumination does not process pain. it amplifies it. The longer a person stays inside the loop, re-examining the comparison, rerunning the evaluation, cycling back through the same thoughts, the worse their mood, their anxiety, and their capacity for clear thinking become. The intervention that research supports is behavioral interruption. Not talking yourself out of the feeling, not trying to reason your way to a better conclusion. Doing something physically different, walking, writing, a brief task that requires focused attention, anything that redirects the brain's resources away from the ruminative loop. Research shows that even 5 to 10 minutes of genuine behavioral interruption can break the cycle sufficiently to reset the emotional baseline. You do not have to resolve the comparison. You just have to break the loop before it deepens. Chapter 6. The identity beneath the comparison. The 7 habits from the previous chapter are powerful and they work. But there is a layer beneath the behavior, and for many people it is the layer that matters most. Because for some people the comparison habit is not simply about social media algorithms or ancient evolutionary circuitry, though both are real and both contribute. It is rooted in something deeper, a belief about what they are fundamentally worth, and the conditions that belief requires to be satisfied. Psychologists call this contingent self-worth. It is the experience of feeling that your value as a person is not inherent, that it must be earned, demonstrated, defended, and continuously reproved through performance, achievement, or the approval of others. When self-worth is contingent, comparison is not just a habit, it is a monitoring system. It is the brain constantly running the question, am I doing enough to deserve to be here? Am I keeping up enough to be valued? Am I earning my place? And because the answer to those questions always requires a reference point, the eyes keep moving outward, keep measuring, keep checking. The person who compares occasionally uses it as a compass. The person who compares compulsively uses it as the only evidence they have of their own worth. Contingent self-worth is not a character flaw. It typically develops in environments where love, approval, or safety genuinely did feel conditional, where monitoring social standing was not a bad habit, but an adaptive and sometimes necessary survival strategy. The difficulty is that a strategy which may have been useful in one environment becomes its own source of suffering when carried into adult life. Because in adult life, there is always someone further ahead on whatever dimension you have chosen as your measure, always someone more successful, more attractive, more accomplished, more at ease. The comparison loop, when it is driven by contingent self-worth, never closes, because the thing it is searching for, the conclusive proof that you are enough, can never be found by looking outward. It can only be found by changing the question. The habits from the previous chapter work at the level of behavior. This chapter is an invitation to go one level deeper. To begin, however, gently, to examine the belief itself. What if your worth were not conditional? What if it did not need to be earned or defended or reproved? What if the race, the one that has felt so urgent for so long, was something you could simply, quietly choose to step out of? Chapter 7. Mexico, the permission you have been waiting for. There is something important to say before we close, something that most content on this subject does not say, because it does not make for a clean, comfortable ending. You are never going to stop comparing yourself to others entirely. Leon Festinger established that in 1954, and everything written since has only confirmed it. The drive is neurological. It is ancient. It served a real purpose for a very long time, and it will never fully switch off, nor should we expect it to. Trying to eliminate the comparison entirely, trying to feel absolutely nothing when you see someone doing better than you, is not a solution. It is a new and exhausting form of self-rejection, and it tends to produce exactly the shame it was meant to prevent. The goal is not to stop comparing. The goal is to stop letting the comparison be the final word on who you are. Here is the real distinction, and it is the one that changes everything. There is a person who sees someone more successful and concludes, "I am not enough. Their success is a verdict on me." And there is a person who sees the exact same thing and thinks, "Interesting. What direction does that point me in? What can I learn from it? Is that even the direction I genuinely want to move?" Same trigger, completely different neural response, completely different life outcome. The habits in Chapter 5 exist to move you from the first response toward the second, not by making you relentlessly positive or by denying reality, by building, through repetition over time, circuits that intercept the comparison at the moment it fires and redirect it towards something that serves you. There is also something else worth sitting with before you close this audiobook and return to your day. The people you compare yourself to most intensely are almost certainly not aware of the race you believe you are running against them. They are too busy running their own comparison loops, their own midnight scrolls, their own quiet audits against someone else's edited and curated life. Everyone is. You are not falling behind in a race that everyone else is effortlessly winning. You are one of billions of human beings, all carrying the same ancient wiring, all measuring the full, unedited reality of their own lives against the carefully assembled fragments of everyone else's. You are enough. Not because you have caught up, not because your numbers are right, or your timeline is on schedule, or your life looks the way the algorithm suggests it should, because you are a whole person, moving through a whole life, with your own values, and your own pace, and your own definition of what enough actually means. The only race worth running is the one that leads toward a life that genuinely, quietly feels like yours. Social comparison is not going away. The research of Festinger, of Vogel and her colleagues, of McComb and Mills, it all points to the same conclusion. This is part of being human. The platforms are not going away. The ancient wiring is not going away. But the way you respond to all of it, the story you tell yourself in the moment after the comparison fires, that is entirely within your reach. That is what this audiobook has been about. Take one habit from today, just one. Practice it this week, not perfectly, intentionally. Because intention, practiced consistently, is how the brain changes. It is how new circuits form. It is how the response that has been running on autopilot begins, slowly, to come under your direction. If this audiobook gave you something useful, something that made the weight feel lighter, or the loop feel less inevitable, share it with one person in your life who you know is carrying this quietly right now. That may be the most valuable thing you do today.